What is the Paris Climate Conference? Well, you can think of it as a dinner party for 25,000 people, and none of them really get along that well, and they have to save the world from total climate disaster. But will it actually work? To start, let's take a look back the last 25 years of negotiations. In 1992, in Rio de Janeiro, the UN created a treaty to stabilize greenhouse gas levels so they wouldn't actually mess with the climate. But the treaty mostly just said that countries should figure out how to actually accomplish that goal using other future treaties. The Kyoto Protocol required industrialized countries to cut their GHG emissions a little, but developing countries, including China and India, weren't required to curb emissions at all. And the US didn't ratify the treaty, so that didn't really work. After 12 years of negotiations dragging on, the big dinner party that was supposed to result in a planet-saving deal actually went pretty badly. So last year in Lima, diplomats agreed on a new approach. Let each country decide for itself how it will fight climate change, but commit to it, damn it. These country-specific pledges are called Intended Nationally Determined Contributions, or INDCs. So now we're in Paris, where diplomats hope to reach an agreement that centers around countries' INDCs. But how can we hold countries accountable to those pledges? And what actually goes into them? There are a bunch of different options on the menu. And the prices vary dramatically. So India leans over to the United States and says, I've got 300 million people without electricity, I think I'm just gonna stick with a bunch of the cheap coal. And the US, kind of hypocritically, says, no way, India, you've got to try the green energy. It is phenomenal. And India says, no, I really think I want the coal. You used to love it, you look great, and I think I should give it a shot. And then China leans over to India and deadpans, you should really try the green energy. But if India thinks it deserves to use cheap and easy coal to speed up its development and lift several millions out of poverty, who is the US or China to say that it shouldn't? And that's just the first course. There are plenty of other courses to be picked through and paid for. How much effort do we put toward preventing climate change by regulating power plants or replacing fossil fuel subsidies with renewable energy subsidies versus adapting to it by, say, building seawalls versus compensating those already screwed by it by awarding emergency funding to repair damage caused by natural disasters? The more we can mitigate climate change, the less we actually have to adapt to it, but climate change is already hitting some communities heavier than others. Furthermore, can we make clean technology easy for developing countries to acquire? And what does it even mean to be a developing country? How do we make sure that countries have the strongest institutions and best information to deal with climate change? And then, as with all dinners, the tensest moment arrives. What do we do with the bill? Poorer countries could develop cheaply and sustainably if richer countries were covering a lot of the expense. After Copenhagen, richer countries agreed to mobilize $100 billion annually by 2020 in funding for countering climate change in developing countries. But where exactly will that money come from, and how much more will be needed? All these questions are on the table in Paris. So what might actually be achieved? In 2010, world leaders decided that we'd have to keep global warming below 2 degrees Celsius or we'd be in for full-scale world meltdown. Bad news is that there's no way any Paris Agreement will achieve that. But the good news is that doesn't mean the world has to end. If we continue things business as usual, we might be in for 4.5 degrees of warming. But if countries committed to existing INDCs, that would help us bring that down to about 3 degrees. Hotter than we want, but better than nothing. And a Paris deal could at least start to figure out how to mobilize that money and technology to make that follow-through happen. And the better news is that even if Paris totally flops and everybody's just hurling brie and baguette at one another, cities and private companies can take action to cut emissions and make a difference. In fact, they're the real key players here, because diplomacy isn't real climate action. How does any treaty matter if no one does what it says? Grist will be in Paris this November and December covering the climate conference. Check in with us then for all the policy news and baguettes you could ever want.